I lived in that house for 46 years before I discovered the door my husband never wanted me to find. My name is Margaret Collins. I was 73 years old when a loose piece of paneling in my basement changed everything I thought I knew about my marriage. Robert and I had shared that home for most of our lives. We raised our son Brian there. We celebrated birthdays, anniversaries, and holidays within those walls. I believed there were no secrets left in that house. I was wrong. It had been 8 months since Robert passed away. The silence he left behind still lingered in every room. His favorite chair remained beside the fireplace. His coffee mug still sat in the cabinet exactly where he had always kept it. Some days I could almost convince myself he had simply stepped out for a walk. Then reality would return. To keep myself busy, I decided to renovate the basement. The space had become cluttered over the years. Old furniture, dusty boxes, forgotten tools, and holiday decorations filled every corner. My neighbor Sarah had offered to help, but I insisted I could manage most of it myself. One afternoon, while moving an old wooden bookshelf that had not been touched in decades, I noticed something strange. As the shelf scraped across the concrete floor, it exposed a section of wall that looked slightly different from the rest. At first, I assumed it was simply an old repair. But when I knocked against it with my knuckles, the sound surprised me. The wall sounded hollow. I froze. I knocked again. The same hollow echo answered back. My pulse quickened. Curious, I ran my hand across the surface. Years of dust coated the paneling. Near one edge, I discovered a narrow groove almost impossible to see unless the light struck it at exactly the right angle. It looked deliberate. My heart began beating faster. Robert had completed countless projects around the house during our marriage. He could build almost anything. Suddenly I wondered if this wall was one of them. I searched the surrounding area carefully. After several minutes, my fingers brushed against a small metal latch hidden behind the edge of the shelf. I stared at it in disbelief. The latch was old but functional. Someone had designed it to remain unnoticed. Slowly, I pulled it. A soft click echoed through the basement. The section of wall shifted slightly. I stepped back as a narrow door emerged from what had appeared to be solid paneling. For a long moment, I simply stood there staring. The air felt heavier somehow. Questions raced through my mind. Why had Robert hidden a door in our basement? How long had it been there? And why had he never mentioned it? Gathering my courage, I wrapped my hand around the dusty handle and slowly pulled the hidden door open for the very first time. The hidden door opened inward with surprising ease. A faint scent of old paper and cedar drifted into the basement. I reached for the light switch just inside the doorway, expecting nothing to happen. Instead, a warm yellow light filled the space. My breath caught in my throat. The room was not a small storage closet or unfinished crawl space. It was a fully constructed room. A room that someone had carefully designed and maintained. For several moments, I remained standing in the doorway, unable to move. Robert had built this beneath our house, and somehow I had never known it existed. The room looked almost untouched by time. Along one wall stood tall wooden bookshelves filled with binders, journals, and neatly labeled boxes. A large desk occupied the center of the room. An old leather chair sat behind it. Framed photographs rested on shelves beside several filing cabinets. Everything appeared organized. Intentional. Almost as if Robert had expected someone to enter one day. Slowly, I stepped inside. My footsteps echoed softly across the floor. The walls were finished with the same attention to detail Robert brought to every project. A small clock hung above the desk. Although it had long since stopped running, seeing it there made the room feel strangely personal. I ran my fingers across the surface of the desk. Dust covered everything, but not heavily. That puzzled me. If this room had been sealed for years, why did it seem so well preserved? My attention shifted toward the photographs. Most were family pictures I recognized. Robert and me on our wedding day. Brian as a child. Vacations. Holidays. Ordinary moments from a lifetime together. Then I noticed something unusual. Several photographs had handwritten notes on the back. Dates. Locations. Observations. The handwriting belonged to Robert. It felt less like a collection of memories and more like documentation. The realization unsettled me. Why would he keep records of family photographs? I opened one of the filing cabinets. Inside were carefully organized folders arranged by year. I resisted the urge to start reading immediately. There was too much to absorb. Instead, I continued exploring the room. Near the far wall stood a wooden chest, several storage boxes, and a metal cabinet. Everything seemed important. Everything seemed connected to a purpose I did not yet understand. Then I spotted something resting beneath the desk. It was a small black lockbox. Unlike everything else in the room, it appeared deliberately concealed. I knelt and carefully pulled it into the light. The box was solid metal with a combination lock on the front. Attached to the handle was a yellowed note. My pulse quickened as I unfolded the paper. Only 6 words were written across it in Robert's familiar handwriting. For Margaret. When the time is right. I stared at the message for a long moment. Somehow, I knew the answers I had been searching for were locked inside that box. For nearly an hour, I sat at the desk staring at the lockbox. The note alone had unsettled me more than the hidden room itself. Robert had never been dramatic. He was practical. If he left a message saying the time was right, then he must have expected this moment to come eventually. The problem was that I had no idea how to open the box. I searched the desk carefully. Inside the drawers I found pens, notebooks, receipts, and stacks of handwritten notes. Everything was organized with remarkable precision. Robert had always been that way. Every document had a place. Every file had a label. Yet nowhere could I find a combination or a key. As I continued searching, my eyes landed on a framed photograph sitting near the corner of the desk. It showed Robert and me standing beside a lake during a vacation many years earlier. At first, it seemed ordinary. Then I noticed writing on the back. Turning the frame over, I found a date and a short note in Robert's handwriting. The note read, "Some numbers matter more than others." I frowned. It felt like a clue. Suddenly, I remembered the combination lock on the box. My pulse quickened. I searched the room for additional photographs. Several contained similar notes. Most reference dates connected to important family events. Our wedding anniversary. Brian's birthday. The day we moved into the house. Robert had never been sentimental in an obvious way, but he remembered every meaningful date. I carried the lockbox to the desk and tried several combinations. None worked. I sat back inside. Then my attention shifted to a small leather journal resting on a shelf above the desk. Unlike the other notebooks, this one had no label. Inside, I found brief entries spanning several years. Most described ordinary events. Repairs around the house. Family gatherings. Conversations. Then one entry caught my attention. Robert had written about creating a place where important things could remain protected until they were needed. The date matched the year he renovated the basement. My hands trembled slightly as I continued reading. A later entry mentioned concerns about certain financial matters and disagreements he preferred not to discuss openly. He never named anyone directly. Yet I sensed a growing uneasiness in his words. This was not the Robert the first thought I knew. Not because he was dishonest, but because he had been carrying burdens privately. I returned to the lockbox and examined it again. This time, I noticed faint scratches near the combination dial. 3 numbers appeared slightly more worn than the others. Carefully, I entered them. The lock clicked immediately. I froze. For a moment, I could only stare. Then I slowly lifted the lid. Inside rested a sealed envelope, several account statements, and a letter addressed specifically to me. Across the front, written in Robert's unmistakable handwriting, were words that instantly made my heart race. Margaret, if you are reading this, someone may already know this room exists. My hands trembled as I unfolded the letter. Robert's handwriting filled the page. Even after 8 months, seeing his words felt like hearing his voice again. I took a deep breath and began reading. The letter started simply. Robert told me he loved me. He thanked me for the life we had built together and for the years we shared in that house. Then the tone changed. He explained that the room had not been created to hide something from me. It had been created to protect something for me. That sentence stopped me cold. Robert went on to describe concerns he had developed during the final years of his life. He never accused anyone directly. Instead, he wrote the way he always approached difficult situations. Calmly, carefully, fact by fact. According to the letter, he had discovered irregular financial activity involving accounts connected to family matters. At first, he believed the discrepancies were mistakes. Later, he became less certain. Rather than create conflict, he began documenting everything privately. The binders, journals, and files surrounding me were part of that effort. My eyes moved quickly across the page. Robert mentioned conversations that left him uneasy. Decisions being discussed without his knowledge. Questions about property ownership. Questions about future inheritance. Questions about access to accounts. The more I read, the more unsettled I became. Then I reached a paragraph that mentioned Jennifer. My pulse immediately quickened. Robert did not accuse her of wrongdoing. Yet he admitted that several interactions involving Jennifer had caused him concern. He urged me not to jump to conclusions if I ever found the room. Instead, he encouraged me to examine evidence and trust facts rather than emotions. That sounded exactly like Robert. Before I could continue reading, a sound from upstairs made me freeze. A door closed somewhere inside the house. I lowered the letter and listened carefully. Silence followed. I reminded myself that old houses often settled and creaked. Still, uneasiness settled over me. Robert's warning echoed in my mind. Someone may already know this room exists. I stood and climbed the basement stairs to check the house. Every room appeared empty. The front door remained locked. The kitchen looked exactly as I had left it. After a few minutes, I returned to the hidden room feeling slightly foolish. Yet, something immediately caught my attention. The top drawer of the desk stood partially open. I was certain it had been closed earlier. Slowly, I approached. Inside the drawer, several folders remained neatly stacked. But one folder was missing. I knew it because a rectangular gap sat between two groups of files. Someone had removed something. My heart began pounding. Had I overlooked it earlier? Or had another person entered this room before me? Then I noticed a fresh footprint in the dust near the far filing cabinet. The print certainly did not belong to Robert. And it did not belong to me. For several seconds, I could not move. I stared at the footprint in the dust and tried to convince myself there was a simple explanation. Perhaps I had somehow created it while exploring the room. Perhaps it had been there all along. But deep down, I knew neither possibility was true. The print was fresh. The edges were sharp and clearly defined. Someone had been in the room recently. My pulse pounded in my ears as I carefully examined the floor. The footprint led toward the filing cabinets and then disappeared where the concrete floor became cleaner. Whoever had entered the room knew exactly where to go. They had not wandered around searching. They had come with a purpose. Slowly, I returned to the desk and reviewed the contents of the open drawer. The empty space between the folders bothered me. Robert had organized everything with remarkable precision. A missing file would not have gone unnoticed by him. I began comparing labels on nearby folders. Most contained dates and financial records. Others held notes about property taxes, insurance documents, and household accounts. Then I noticed a gap in the sequence of years. One folder should have been positioned between two others. It was gone. The realization sent a chill through me. Someone had not only entered the room. Someone had removed a specific file. I carefully placed Robert's letter back inside the lockbox and carried several documents upstairs. Before doing anything else, I called Sarah. Within an hour, she arrived at the house. I trusted Sarah more than almost anyone. We had been neighbors and friends for nearly 20 years. After showing her the hidden room, I watched disbelief spread across her face. "Margaret," she whispered, "this changes everything." I nodded. Then I showed her the footprint and the missing space in the filing drawer. Sarah immediately understood why I was worried. Together, we examined dozens of photographs stored throughout the room. Many had been taken over several years. Most seemed ordinary. Yet a pattern slowly emerged. Robert had photographed documents, shelves, and even sections of the room itself. At first, the images appeared meaningless. Then Sarah pointed to one photograph taken several years earlier. It showed the exact filing drawer that now contained the gap. The missing folder was visible. We enlarged the image on her phone. A label appeared on the tab. Family Trust Review. My heart skipped a beat. Neither of us knew what the file contained, but the title alone suggested it was important. Sarah suggested checking the home's exterior security cameras. Robert had installed them years ago, and I rarely used them. Together, we reviewed recent recordings. Most showed ordinary activity. Delivery drivers. Passing cars. Neighbors walking dogs. Then a recording from 3 nights earlier appeared. The camera facing the side entrance captured someone entering the house after dark using a key. As the figure stepped beneath the porch light, my breath caught. I immediately recognized who it was. The person walking into my home was Jennifer. For a long moment, neither Sarah nor I spoke. We simply stared at the security footage. Jennifer stepped through the side entrance with the confidence of someone who knew exactly where she was going. She did not hesitate. She did not appear surprised by anything. Most importantly, she entered the house at a time when she believed nobody was there. My stomach tightened. Jennifer had a key. That part was not unusual. Family members often had spare keys for emergencies. What troubled me was why she came at night without mentioning it. We continued watching. The recording showed Jennifer leaving nearly 40 minutes later carrying a large tote bag. The camera angle prevented us from seeing what was inside. Yet the timing alone was enough to raise questions. Sarah looked at me carefully. "Have you asked her about this?" she said. I slowly shook my head. Not yet. Something told me confrontation would accomplish very little at this stage. Robert's letter kept replaying in my mind. Examine evidence. Trust facts, not emotions. The next morning, I called Edward Turner. Edward had served as Robert's attorney and financial advisor for many years. If anyone understood the documents hidden in the room, it would be him. When I explained what I had discovered, a long silence followed. Finally, Edward spoke. "Margaret, I think we should meet in person." His tone immediately caught my attention. "Is something wrong?" I asked. Another pause followed. "There are things Robert asked me to discuss only if certain circumstances developed." My pulse quickened. We arranged to meet that afternoon. Edward's office sat on the 3rd floor of a historic brick building downtown. The moment I arrived, I sensed this was not going to be an ordinary conversation. Several folders already rested on the conference table. Edward greeted me warmly, but appeared unusually serious. After reviewing the photographs, the security footage, and Robert's letter, he nodded slowly. Then he opened one of the folders. Inside were copies of documents I had never seen before. Financial reports, legal reviews, trust summaries. Robert's name appeared throughout the records. So did mine. Then Edward revealed something that completely changed my understanding of the hidden room. Years earlier, Robert had quietly begun investigating irregularities connected to certain family-related financial transactions. He never accused anyone publicly. Instead, he collected information and documented concerns. The room beneath the house had become his secure archive. Every photograph, every journal, every file existed for a reason. My heart pounded as Edward continued. Then he slid a document across the table toward me. The title immediately caught my eye. Family Trust Review. It was the same file label Sarah and I had seen in the old photograph. Edward's expression darkened slightly. "Margaret," he said carefully, "this is the file that appears to be missing from the room. And according to Robert's records, it may explain exactly why someone went looking for it in the first place." Edward opened the folder and carefully removed several documents. I immediately recognized Robert's handwriting in the margins. Notes appeared beside account summaries, transaction records, and trust documents. Every page reflected the same meticulous attention to detail I had seen throughout the hidden room. For years, Robert had been quietly assembling a picture that nobody else knew existed. Edward slid one particular report toward me. "This is where Robert's concerns became serious," he explained. I studied the pages. At first, the information seemed confusing. Then certain names began appearing repeatedly. Family accounts, trust distributions, property discussions, advisory meetings. The transactions themselves were not illegal or even necessarily improper. What troubled Robert was the pattern. Important decisions had been discussed before complete information was available. Assumptions had been made about future ownership. Plans had been discussed regarding assets that were not yet available to anyone. My stomach tightened as I continued reading. Then I reached a section highlighted by Robert. Several notes referenced conversations involving Jennifer. Once again, Robert avoided accusations. Instead, he documented dates, statements, and observations. His goal had never been to create conflict. He wanted facts preserved. Edward leaned forward. Robert worried that if anything happened to him, certain people might become more interested in controlling information than preserving transparency. The sentence lingered in my mind. Suddenly, the missing file seemed far more important than I originally realized. Did Robert ever tell you who he was worried about? I asked. Edward shook his head. No. He believed evidence should speak for itself. That answer sounded exactly like my husband. After another hour reviewing documents, I finally understood why the hidden room existed. It was not a place built to hide secrets. It was a place built to preserve truth. Every record served that purpose. Every photograph. Every journal entry. Every file. Before I left, Edward handed me copies of several key documents. Then he gave me one final piece of advice. Do not confront anyone privately, he said. If questions need answers, ask them where everyone can hear. During the drive home, I thought about those words. By the time I pulled into my driveway, I had made a decision. The following weekend, I would invite the family together. Not for an argument. Not for accusations. For clarity. That evening, I returned to the hidden room and continued reviewing Robert's records. Hours passed unnoticed. Then, tucked inside a binder near the back of a shelf, I discovered something unexpected. A sealed envelope addressed to Brian. My son. The envelope had never been opened. Attached to it was a short note from Robert. If circumstances require it, this should be read in front of everyone. My pulse quickened. Whatever Robert had prepared, he clearly expected a moment when the entire family would need to hear the truth. As I stared at the envelope, my phone vibrated. A text message from Jennifer appeared on the screen. It was unusually brief. We should all have dinner next Saturday. There are some things we need to discuss. I looked from the message to the sealed envelope in my hands and realized the same thought had probably occurred to both of us. The difference was that Jennifer had no idea what Robert had left behind. Saturday arrived with a strange sense of inevitability. From the moment I woke up, I felt as though Robert had been preparing for this day long before any of us realized it would come. Jennifer's dinner invitation had provided the perfect opportunity. Rather than resist, I accepted immediately. Throughout the week, I organized copies of the documents Edward had given me. I reviewed Robert's letters again. I carefully prepared the sealed envelope addressed to Brian. Most importantly, I gathered evidence from the hidden room. If questions were going to be asked, facts would provide the answers. That evening, family members gradually arrived at the house. Brian and Jennifer came first. Several relatives followed shortly afterward. The atmosphere initially felt normal. People chatted in the living room. Dinner was served. Conversations drifted between family updates, grandchildren, and upcoming vacations. Yet beneath the surface, I sensed tension. Jennifer seemed unusually attentive. She smiled often. She checked on everyone repeatedly. More than once, I caught her studying my expression as though trying to determine what I knew. After dessert, she finally moved the evening toward its real purpose. There are some family matters we should discuss, she said pleasantly. The room grew quieter. Brian nodded beside her. Jennifer retrieved a folder from her bag and placed it on the dining table. I immediately recognized several legal forms. My pulse remained steady. Edward's advice echoed in my mind. Ask questions where everyone can hear. Jennifer explained that future planning was important. She spoke about organization, efficiency, and protecting family interests. Her words sounded reasonable. In fact, they sounded remarkably similar to conversations Robert had documented years earlier. Then she slid a document toward me. This would simply help streamline certain decisions in the future, she explained. Several relatives glanced at me expectantly. For a moment, I said nothing. Then I stood. The room became completely silent. Slowly, I carried a storage box from the hallway and placed it on the table. Inside rested copies of Robert's letters, photographs, financial records, and journals from the hidden room. Confusion spread across several faces. Jennifer's expression changed instantly. Not dramatically. Just enough for me to notice. Before we discuss any paperwork, I said calmly, there is something everyone deserves to see. One by one, I distributed copies of key documents. Family members began reading. Questions appeared almost immediately. Dates, notes, financial reviews, property discussions. Then I explained the hidden room beneath the house. The room Robert had built. The records he had preserved. The concerns he had quietly documented. Nobody interrupted. Nobody laughed. The evidence spoke too clearly. Finally, I removed the sealed envelope Robert had addressed to Brian. My son stared at it in disbelief. Across the front, written in Robert's unmistakable handwriting, were simple words. To be opened only when the truth becomes necessary. Brian's hands trembled slightly as he accepted the envelope. Around the table, every person watched in silence. Jennifer no longer appeared confident. For the first time all evening, she looked genuinely worried. Then Brian carefully broke the seal and began reading. The room remained completely silent as Brian read the letter. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Even the sound of dishes in the kitchen seemed distant. I watched my son's eyes move across the page while emotion slowly appeared on his face. Confusion came first. Then surprise. Then something deeper. By the time he reached the final paragraph, his hands were trembling. Slowly, he lowered the letter and stared at the table. For several moments, he seemed unable to speak. Finally, he looked up. Dad wrote this 6 years ago, he said quietly. His voice sounded different. More serious. More reflective. I nodded. Yes. Brian swallowed hard and glanced back at the letter. Robert had addressed the message directly to him. The contents were simple but powerful. Robert explained that protecting a family required honesty, even when honesty was uncomfortable. He urged Brian to value transparency above convenience and facts above assumptions. Most importantly, he warned him never to allow loyalty to a person to outweigh loyalty to the truth. Around the table, family members listened carefully. Then Brian began reading portions of the letter aloud. Robert described why he created the hidden room. Not because he distrusted his family. Not because he wanted secrets. He created it because important records sometimes needed protection from misunderstanding, pressure, and selective memory. He believed future disagreements might arise after his death. He wanted evidence preserved so that no one would be forced to rely on competing stories. The more Brian read, the clearer Robert's intentions became. The room beneath the house was never designed to conceal the truth. It was designed to preserve it. Jennifer sat quietly throughout the reading. The confidence she displayed earlier had completely disappeared. Nobody accused her of anything. Nobody raised their voice. Yet the collection of evidence, letters, records, photographs, and documented observations had created a picture that could not be ignored. Questions naturally followed. Family members asked about the missing file. They asked about the late-night visit to the house. They asked about the conversations Robert had documented. Jennifer answered some questions. Others she struggled to explain. What mattered most was not proving bad intentions. What mattered was understanding why Robert felt compelled to create safeguards in the first place. Eventually, Brian folded the letter and placed it carefully on the table. He looked at me. Then he looked around the room. I think Dad wanted us to stop guessing and start listening, he said. Nobody disagreed. The atmosphere gradually softened. Tension gave way to reflection. Family members continued discussing the documents, but the conversation no longer felt confrontational. It felt honest. For the first time since discovering the hidden room, I felt the weight lifting from my shoulders. The uncertainty that had followed me for weeks was finally beginning to disappear. Later that evening, after everyone had gone home, I returned to the basement alone. The hidden room looked different now. Not because anything had changed physically, but because I finally understood why it existed. I walked slowly around the shelves, touching the journals and binders Robert had spent years organizing. Every file represented care. Every note represented responsibility. Every photograph represented his determination to leave clarity behind. On the desk rested the first letter I had found inside the lockbox. I picked it up and read the final paragraph again. Robert had written that truth rarely arrives all at once. It reveals itself one piece at a time, often when people are finally ready to see it. Standing in that room, I realized how right he had been. For months after his death, I thought I was losing a husband. In reality, I was also discovering the final gift he left behind. Not money. Not property. Not secrets. Understanding. The hidden room had not revealed a different man than the one I married. It revealed exactly who Robert had always been. Thoughtful. Careful. Protective. Honest. As I turned off the light and closed the concealed door behind me, I felt something I had not felt in a very long time. Peace. The house was no longer holding secrets. The truth had finally found its way home.